believe it was a great philosopher and poet once said, "Mama, I'm in love with a criminal."
I can explain.
So, young people openly support rism now. This is fine. We're going to break down some disturbing polling about the recent murder of a healthcare executive that makes me worry for the future of this country, and so much more. On today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I bring you my independent take on politics, the media, and the internet. Now, without further ado, the kids are not all right. At least not the young adults, age 18 to 29, a plurality of whom now openly support rism. I know, that sounds like right-wing hyperbole or fear-mongering or alarmism, but it's not. It's just the reality that we now know thanks to a brand new, incredibly disturbing poll from Emerson College. For context, as you probably know by now, on TikTok and elsewhere on the internet, social media influencers celebrated and even sexualized Luigi Mangione, the alleged killer who allegedly murdered in cold blood and in extrajudicial fashion United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Here's a sampling of that in case you forgot how the reaction went down online.
So this is who police believe was responsible for the United Healthcare CEO Pew Pew. His name's Luigi. All I can say is, Mamma mia. Does he need a Mario? I'm kidding. I believe it was a great philosopher and poet once said, "Mama, I'm in love with a criminal. And this type of love isn't rational, it's physical." That was Britney Spears. And I believe we're all feeling that right now. I believe if you're going to do superhero like shit, you better look like one, okay? This man clearly did that.
I can explain.
That guy who shot that other guy is really hot. Just saw a photo of his torso online. Luigi, you're so pretty. And I know you're in hot water, but the comments say you're being framed. Luigi, wanna kiss me? And I hope you plead insanity so capitalism's blamed.
This was disturbing, of course, to see people simping for murder, not even caring that somebody should get a trial or anything, just supporting someone being gunned down in the street. But we didn't know how widespread the sentiment was or whether it was partially meant like as a joke, in jest. Now we do, and the results are really concerning. We're going to go through this poll's findings in great detail after a quick message from today's sponsor. My home is my most valuable financial asset, so protecting it is a top priority for me. And that's why I'm happy to partner with today's sponsor, Home Title Lock. The FBI calls home title fraud house stealing and warns all homeowners to stay vigilant and monitor their home titles. Every homeowner is at risk of having their home's titles stolen. It just takes one piece of paper filed with the county. Why aren't the authorities doing anything to stop this? Well, the county recording systems in the United States are vulnerable to fraudulent, mistaken, and otherwise inaccurate filings. And as long as the documents are filled out properly, government agencies are required to accept them, even if they think they're fraudulent. So you have to protect yourself. And that's where Home Title Lock and their triple lock protection comes in. They monitor your title 24/7 and urgently alert you if there are any changes. Plus, if you're a victim of home title fraud, their team of experts will restore your most valuable asset at no cost to you. You can sign up today at hometitlelock.com/Brad and use promo code BRAD30 for 30 days of protection free and a comprehensive title history report to make sure you're not already a victim. That's hometitlelock.com/Brad or by using the link in the description. And now back to today's show. So anyway, this new poll from Emerson College surveyed Americans about the murder of Brian Thompson and asked them a simple question. Do you think this was morally acceptable? Even if you think the health insurance industry is incredibly messed up, even if you didn't like Brian Thompson, most people should understand, right, that just killing someone in the street in cold blood with no trial, no due process, because you disagree with the actions they've done as a CEO or whatever, is not okay. But a shocking percentage of young Americans aged 18 to 29 actually thought this was perfectly morally acceptable. 41%, a plurality of young people aged 18 to 29, told Emerson pollsters that the extrajudicial murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was, quote, acceptable. And about 20% said they were neutral on this question, and only 33% had the common sense to say that the murder was completely unacceptable. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Democratic respondents were much more likely to say they morally approved of the murder, with Republicans significantly less likely, and this sentiment was much more widespread among this young cohort than it was in all the other older age groups. Process these numbers with me for just a moment. A plurality of young people, so not a majority, but the most of any of the options that were available, openly said they support rism. Because rest assured, is what this killer, allegedly Luigi Mangione, did. The FBI simply defines domestic terrorism as violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. Basically, is when you use violence against civilians to further a political agenda, which is exactly what this killer allegedly did. He murdered someone in cold blood because he wanted to send a political message about the healthcare industry in the United States, a message he clearly didn't even understand. He admitted in his manifesto or whatever that he didn't understand it well enough to actually explain it, but said others have, which not great that you don't even fully understand the thing you're using to justify an act of murder, but okay. The alleged shooter has been charged with terrorism, and some left-wing types are acting surprised or horrified by this, but to me it seems entirely appropriate. What he did is the textbook definition of domestic terrorism. So when these young people say, 41% of them, that they think this murder is morally acceptable, what they're saying is that, at least in this instance, they support openly and proudly. It's really hard for me to even articulate how morally perverse this logic actually is. Nobody, and I mean no one, deserves to be killed without any due process or trial. If Brian Thompson actually did something evil or criminal with his company, that's something that should be investigated and he should be prosecuted for it with a trial. Or people could vote to change the healthcare policies in this country to change what those companies are allowed to do. Ironically, the admittedly deeply flawed healthcare system that everyone is so mad about is Obamacare. But vigilante executions without due process, that's the stuff of banana republics and failed states, not functioning liberal democracies. And as the commentator Robert Sterling explained on X, the implications of these beliefs and this perverse moral logic are truly, truly astounding. He wrote, "Are we allowed to assassinate the CEOs of other industries you view as harmful? For example, fossil fuels? Or is it open season only on insurance executives?" This is an excellent question. Who gets to decide which businesses are so bad that it's okay to gun people down in the street? And how is that not going to lead to the collapse of society as we know it? He continues, "Murdering Brian Thompson will do literally nothing to increase the availability or affordability of healthcare. Is it justified to shoot someone in the back simply out of frustration with the industry in which he works?" That's a good question. Is it literally okay in these people's minds to hurt people just to vent while accomplishing absolutely nothing? He asks, how far down the corporate hierarchy can we target? Are all employees of insurance companies valid targets for assassination, or only senior executives? What about mid-level executives, managers, actuaries, entry-level analysts, the custodians who clean their offices? Seriously, I want to know this. I want to see one of them articulate, like, where is this line of when it's okay to kill people for their jobs and when it's not? How do you possibly explain or justify that? Here's the other point that Robert raised that I think is truly an important question to ask. The largest insurance operator in the US is the federal government via Medicare. Is it therefore acceptable to kill political officials since Medicare also denies some claims? Seriously, The same logic all these young people use to somehow try to justify this murder of this healthcare CEO could be 100% applied to government politicians and administrators who run all the government programs. Is it just open season now? Are we a failed state where civilians can just assassinate politicians and we think that's fine? I certainly don't. But this is 41% of my age group. Now, here's a question that I would just love to ask one of these deeply morally confused young people or their champions online if I could actually get them to talk to me. What about a vigilante murdering the CEO of Planned Parenthood? I think most of these young people who overwhelmingly skew left would be horrified by that. And I would be too. That's not something I would ever think is okay or justifiable. But there's no thought process that one could use to justify the murder of an insurance CEO that couldn't also be used by some pro-life extremist to target and kill the CEO of Planned Parenthood. Have they not realized this inconsistency, or do they just not care? It's also worth asking, how the heck did we get here? To this perverse outcome where so many young people are just openly in support of some. In part, I blame social media and the way it's just desensitized people towards violence. In part, I blame the kind of alarmism and fear-mongering that has convinced so many young people that things are so much worse than they actually are, which then pushes them towards these radical mindsets. And in part, I really do have to blame the political figures who they look to for guidance, the AOCs and Elizabeth Warrens of the world, the progressive politicians that young people flock to and view as thought leaders who have totally failed this basic test of moral clarity with their responses to this incident. They've all essentially said something like, violence is wrong, but I understand why people feel like this, or so on. Take a listen to what the two of them had to say.
This is not to say that an act of violence is justified, but I think for anyone who is confused or shocked or appalled, they need to understand that people interpret and feel and experience denied claims as an act of violence against them.
Violence is never the answer. This guy gets a trial who's allegedly killed the CEO of United Health. But you can only push people so far. And then they start to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah.
Somebody should ask AOC. If you think denying someone's insurance claim is murder, which is insane, oftentimes claims are denied to keep prices down because providers are charging too much or because the policy literally doesn't cover the thing they're claiming for. Is it okay to assassinate politicians then? Because Medicaid and Medicare deny claims at high rates as well. And somebody should ask Elizabeth Warren if there's any other incident, maybe January 6th, for example, where she would see an act of political violence and ask, well, but we have to think about how people are feeling. No, political violence is wrong. But guys, to me, how we got here is almost a moot point. We are where we are, and we face a situation today where a plurality of young people in this country openly think rism is morally acceptable. All I can really do now is wonder whether a country where these people grow up in inherent positions of power can actually survive without tearing itself apart. I hope so, but I don't know at this point, honestly. But what do you guys think of this story and of this poll? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button if you appreciated my commentary, and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Plus, do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, this might just be the most insufferable woke TikTok of all time.
A tip for you if you don't want to use bigoted language. Don't use an adjective as a noun for people. Practically, what does this look like? Words like transgenders, illegals, and females are all offensive. Instead, talk about transgendered people, illegal immigrants, or female people. Or just refer to us by our gender, women. Using an adjective as a noun in this way is one way to dehumanize people.
Oh my God. the language policing of the woke left is so tired and so insufferable. I mean, when they talk about not using bigoted language, they're not talking about avoiding slurs. They're policing people's micro-phrasing as if it makes some sort of difference when it's really just all part of a euphemistic treadmill. For example, they said homeless people was stigmatizing, and then now they should call them unhoused people. And it's like, they still don't have a house. You haven't solved the problem. You haven't helped anyone. You've just virtue signaled, and then whatever stigma was attached to the old phrase will probably just move along to the next phrase, and then you'll tell us that one's problematic and we need a new phrase, and the whole thing is such a pointless and fruitless endeavor, other than, I guess, making yourself seem so tolerant and open-minded and progressive on social media, which is, of course, these people's real goal. But what she's saying makes no sense at all. To claim that using an adjective as a noun therefore makes it offensive and dehumanizing is stupid. I mean, athletic people and athletic participants are called athletes. Is that dehumanizing? Calling gay people gays is not considered offensive. Like, that doesn't offend me or dehumanize me at all. I don't say transgenders because it's just a little clunky and it's just not really, I think, the way you're supposed to say that. I do say transgender people, but I'm not going to tone police somebody who says that. I'm going to worry about what they're actually saying in its substance and whether that is something that is true or false, offensive or not, bigoted or not. Like, the micromanagement of the phraseology that people use is so not the point. And for example, saying, oh, you have to say undocumented immigrant instead of illegal immigrant or whatever is a great example of why Democrats and progressives lose the public on immigration issues. People don't care. They don't want you to go out of your way to avoid acknowledging reality, which is that they immigrated illegally, so they are illegal immigrants. I wouldn't say illegals is a little old-fashioned, but again, what matters is what you're saying, not the minutia of how you say it. And I still am not over the fact that she suggested that females is offensive. It's just referring to a group of people by their biological sex. Like, that is not offensive. It is factual. And she's saying to call them women instead, but these are the same people that tell us that not all females are women. So the math is not mathing for me, Cupcake. It is simply not. Now, someone in her comment section did point this out, saying that the same people telling us not to say females and to say women can't define woman. And this person tried to offer a definition, but failed, honestly.
There seems to be a lot of confused conservatives in that comment section that don't understand what a woman is. Women are adult humans who identify as women. Oh, but that's circular. Of course it is. It is merely a concept. Gender is not an objective truth. It is what we make it as a society. I don't have a problem defining what a woman is. You just don't like my definition. Because it makes you uncomfortable that gender is not immutable. Because if gender can be questioned, that means that you may need to question yours. And I understand in a patriarchal society that can be scary.
Oh my gosh, this video made me roll my eyes so hard I think I gave myself a headache. You can't define woman as any adult who identifies as a woman. That's not a definition. It's meaningless. If you define something by using the word, you haven't defined it. Like, I don't know how to explain to these people how language works. This is just language 101. And if all it takes to be a woman is to identify as one, but anything else cannot be different, right? So I could just sit here and in one moment say, I now identify as a woman, therefore I am woman, without changing anything about me, then whether you realize it or not, what you're saying is that women isn't a meaningful concept. It means literally nothing. I don't think that's a message most people with common sense are going to be compelled by or are going to sign on to. And I actually don't think it's necessary to accept that radical take and that radical perspective to even advocate for, like, acceptance for transgender people. You can say that a woman is an adult human female and a transgender woman is simply somebody born biologically male who wants to live life as, for all intents and purposes, a woman, even though they are not one. That's not offensive. That's just true. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't have grace for those people or treat them with dignity or kindness, but instead you're pushing this total nonsense because you think it's what you have to do to be inclusive or tolerant or open-minded or whatever, but you're actually having the opposite effect because you're making people think you're radical and ludicrous because what you're saying simply is, and in the process making them less likely to accept the things you're promoting and pushing. So great job, I guess, at being so woke and so ridiculous that even most of the people in the TikTok comment section thought this creator was full of it and that what she was saying was ridiculous. But what did you think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through this sheer stupidity. It truly mind-numbing stuff, honestly. And now we got to talk politics for a minute because Trump is making more headlines again, as he is so wont to do, by filing a civil lawsuit against a pollster and newspaper who published incorrect poll predictions about the Iowa state election results. Take a listen to this coverage from CNN.
Donald Trump is now suing another media outlet. This time it's the Des Moines Register, that's the newspaper in Iowa, over that pre-election poll. Remember the one just before the election that showed Trump losing the state to Kamala Harris by a very wide margin. Trump, of course, won Iowa by a very wide margin, more than 13 points. The lawsuit is accusing the Des Moines Register's longtime pollster and the paper itself of brazen election interference. Those are the words they use in the filing.
And here's what Trump himself had to say about this dispute.
I'm going to be bringing one against the people in Iowa, their newspaper, which had a very, very good pollster who got me right all the time. And then just before the election, she said I was going to lose by 3 or 4 points, and it became the biggest story all over the world, because I was going to win Iowa by 20 points. The farmers loved me, and I loved the farmers. And it was interesting the way she did it. She brought it down 2 weeks before. She said I was going to only win by 4. That was a big story. But that was good because she brought it down from like 22 points to 4, or whatever the number was. Way up, an easy win. Never even thought to go there. I respect them, I love them, and they understand there's no reason to go there.
Now, my take on this is somewhat nuanced, but it goes without saying this pollster really messed up. I mean, they totally predicted the election result wrong. They have massive egg on their face. It's a huge professional embarrassment and a disgrace. And they've rightfully been condemned and criticized for, like, how did you possibly get it this wrong? Because they predicted Kamala way up in the state and then Trump won it convincingly. Like, clearly they did something wrong or their poll was flawed in some way. But I'm also not on board with Trump's lawsuit and the allegations he's making, at least without some serious evidence that he doesn't appear to have. There's no reason to believe that these pollsters would fraudulently, purposefully architect this poll to be incorrect. It's much more likely simple incompetence or error than some kind of grand conspiracy that they did to concoct a fake poll to affect the election results, which is what Trump is alleging without evidence. Why any pollster, especially one with previously a pretty good reputation, would destroy their entire career to do something that wouldn't even really impact the election, even if it had an impact, the impact could have been to make Kamala voters feel complacent and stay home because they think their candidate's way up in the polls, and make Trump supporters in Iowa go out to the polls because they're worried Trump is behind and then make sure they turn out. Like, it's not even clear that this error cut against Trump. If it had any impact, it could have helped him. So the idea that these pollsters in this newspaper would just light their career and their credibility on fire, create an elaborate hoax, and publish it hoping to have some minor, unclear effect on the outcome strikes me as totally implausible. And regardless, to win this lawsuit, Trump would have to prove damages. What damages? You won overwhelmingly, bro. Like, this didn't hurt you at all. It's stuff like this where Trump is not only sometimes is he a sore loser, he's a sore winner. But there's a free speech element to this as well, which is that newspapers and pollsters have the right to be wrong without lawsuits or without being punished by government courts. As the nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression Fire, which I do some work with for full disclosure, put it in a statement. This lawsuit is incompatible with free speech and freedom of the press. They wrote, President-elect Trump's consumer fraud lawsuit against a pollster in the Des Moines Register is a direct assault on the First Amendment. If newspapers and polling firms are sued for deceptive practices because they publish stories and poll results politicians don't like, every media outlet's First Amendment rights are threatened. Getting a poll wrong is not election interference or fraud. I tend to agree with this, and I don't think this is a Pandora's box that Republicans or conservative media really want open. After all, during COVID, there was actually a similar lawsuit where liberal activists tried to sue conservative media for fraud for their claims about COVID and pushback on establishment narratives. And thankfully, that lawsuit was slapped down and not successful. It was viewed as a violation of the First Amendment. But we don't want this weaponization of consumer fraud allegations to be used to shut down political media just because they get things wrong or they say things that people think are wrong. Now, what about Trump's allegation that this was purposefully, fraudulently done to hurt him? Well, as Fire says, President-elect Trump and others claim the poll wasn't just wrong, it was fabricated with malicious intent. First of all, those allegations are purely speculative. Like I said, they haven't provided any evidence of this, and I don't buy it. I don't think they would risk their entire careers to try to sway Iowa, a state that realistically everyone knew Trump was always going to win? It's just totally implausible to me, and they would need to reveal serious hard proof of that for me to ever believe it. But Fire says that even if there was a little bit of truth to that, it still wouldn't necessarily justify this lawsuit. They write, more importantly, the First Amendment protects even deliberate lies outside of narrow, well-defined contexts that don't apply here, like defamation and actual consumer fraud. Why? Because giving the government, including courts, a more general power to police allegedly false speech, especially in the political realm where free speech is paramount, invites tremendous abuse. Politicians, commentators, and others would constantly be tied up in frivolous lawsuits like this one. This is absolutely an important point, that if you want the government to play the arbiter of truth and to crack down on media outlets that publish false things, that's going to have a chilling effect. And it's going to have a chilling effect on right-wing media and conservative media as well, which gets things wrong sometimes and sometimes gets things right, but in a way that the left and Democratic politicians say is fake news, even though it isn't. This is not a Pandora's box we want to open, and I just think Trump is totally off base here, especially because you don't need to get the government and the courts involved on this one to still have a huge win and to still deal a huge blow to these people that got this wrong. You can deal with this in a free market, right? By them losing their credibility, by people no longer reporting on their polls or viewing them seriously. You don't need the law to get involved. As Fire says, the non-governmental remedy of counter-speech is especially well suited to false political speech, with the extensive scrutiny such speech receives from citizens, politicians, and the press seeking to expose lies and hold speakers accountable. A respected pollster who manufactures data and gets things wildly wrong exposes themselves to serious criticism and damage to their credibility. Let the American public sort it out, not the government. That's where I land on this too. Trump's totally right to feel aggrieved by that ridiculous poll that was so incredibly wrong. But the response is criticism and massive reputational consequences, not censorship and punishment by the court system. I've said for some time now that with some of the cases against him, Trump has been a victim of lawfare, with progressives and Democrats weaponizing the court system to hurt the former president and current president-elect. But the solution to that is to call it out and fight it, not to do the same thing against your perceived political opponents in retribution. Like we learned in kindergarten, guys, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And you always have to think about how the same power, if successful, could be used against you by your political opponents, which is something I don't think Trump and his allies have fully thought through on this one. But what do you guys think? Do you disagree with me? Do you think I'm totally wrong? I'm open to hearing about it in the comments, so do let me know, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now I'll wrap up today's show by reading some of your comments from yesterday's episode. Another person says, Brad, don't go out of your way for a McRib. It's good, but not that good. Okay, yeah, I won't. And honestly, the only time I ever really go to McDonald's is for breakfast food, which is just, chef's kiss from them. My boyfriend introduced me to that, and now we get it all the time. Another person said, I genuinely missed you last week, Brad. Guys, I missed you, and I missed doing this show a lot. So you guys you make it hard for me to even go on vacation and enjoy it, because I miss doing this. But I still had a good time. Another person said, all I'm hearing is Mrs. Ma'am over there doing well enough to hit 3 restaurants in one day. Wow, I wish. Disabled and living on a budget. They can call me slow and old 10 times. Yeah, that's wild how this person is supposedly oppressed, but like their TikTok is just them constantly eating out at all these nice restaurants. And I'm like, life can't be too rough for you, okay? Another comment says, it is illegal in DC to discriminate on the basis of political affiliation, so refusal is not as cool as they think it is. That is true from what I've read, but I'm actually not sure I agree with that law. I kind of do think you should legally have the right to refuse people based on their beliefs, even if that's not something I typically think is good or that companies should do. Another person says, I hate my job. I hate several of my coworkers. I hate my shift. I still show up, show respect, and do my job because I'm an adult who likes being able to pay my bills. Good for you. Mad respect. But I do hope that maybe you're able to find another job soon that doesn't make you miserable, because that's not a fun way to go through life, but kudos to you for being an adult about it. Another person says, I simply don't believe the trans woman, in quotes, was misgendered 3 times at 3 separate restaurants in the same day if they were dressed in women's clothing. I think they're making it up for content. Most people in the hospitality business are, well, hospitable. Yeah, it could be. Hard to say, but honestly, either way, I just have no sympathy for that person. And all right, everybody, that is it for today's episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go, and remember to comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.